Alrighty. Um, Long-term memory systems. That's what we're going to move towards. And let's just go to the slide here now. We've been talking about that modal model of memory, which we will come back to. And we've already kind of talked a little bit about this notion that, well, one of the systems allows us to sort of store information away and then access it again much later. And we call these our long-term memory systems. It's what most of us kind of more think about. From what we've talked about so far, you probably didn't really think of sensory memory as memory. You probably didn't think of working memory as memory. But the thing we'll talk about today, a little more, you'll think of them a little more as memory. Although even here, you'll see that the definition is stretched. And so I want to remind you of that definition again. Anytime the past influences your current behavior, then memory is part of the story, right? And so that's why sensory memory, it's from the past. Working memory, you're bringing information from the past, combining it with your current goals, but that information from the past is changing your behavior. That's why we call that a memory system. But now let's get into long-term memory proper. Okay, so this is just to be clear about things. At some point in time, we experienced some input that went through this whole system. We probably had it in our conscious mind. We experienced it consciously, but then something about that we stored away. So, the best example to think about here is you studying for a course like this, right? You're reading the textbook, you're getting some information that you're thinking about, you're learning about it and you're thinking about it, but then you try to do some things to sort of store that information away so that, well, on your exam, you can pull it back in. Right? And so this is the system we're going to talk about, that system we use to kind of put information away for a while and bring it back at some later time. Okay? So the long-term memory system. Okay. So, I say long-term memory system, but one of the first things you find out about this long-term memory system is it is also systems. There are all these forms of memory. And the first split that we take when we talk about memory is the notion of what we call declarative memory versus non-declarative. What do we mean by that? Declarative means to be able to speak about, right? To declare something to be true. And you also see we use the terms explicit or implicit memory. These declarative memories are things that we know we have learned, and when we are using that information, we're using it in a very intentional way. Okay? So this could be our memory of events, things that happen in our lives, or it could be our memory of just facts, things that we know. But in either case, if someone says, what is the capital of Ontario? And we think, and we go, oh, that's Toronto. We've pulled Toronto out of our long-term memory. We're trying to use that memory. Right? We realize we're recalling the past. The non-declarative forms of memory are ways in which the past influences us without us really kind of consciously trying to retrieve anything. It's just that when we have these experiences from the past, they change us and they change how we behave in the future. And so that sounds kind of crazy, right? But what we'll do to try to give you a sense of this distinction, declarative, non-declarative, and just to talk, we can't talk about all of these memory systems. We're going to focus on these three. And with these three, we can give you a good sense of the distinction between these different kinds of declarative memory, but also how they are distinct from non-declarative memory. Okay? And we'll talk about that in the context of skills and habits. Okay. Let's start with the declarative. Boom, boom, boom. Declarative memory. So this is as close as we're going to get to what you probably thought memory was when you came into this chapter. If I had come up to you at some point and said, hey, can you tell me about that time? Well, tell me what, I don't know, grade 12 was for like for you. What was your high school experience? And, if I ask you that, well, you have to think back and you kind of relive it, right? And when you describe it to me, it's kind of like you're describing a scene from a movie. That's episodic memory, memory for specific events you have experienced. Let me, give you another example of this, and I'll do that silly thing I do sometimes and just say, what did you have for supper last night? in order to answer that question, you kind of throw your mind back there and you get the answer, but you get a whole lot more, right? You usually can sort of imagine the scene where you were having supper. You know who you were having supper with. You might know where you were having supper. You might even have a sense of the sort of ambiance, the music, the lighting, the kind of feel of the place where you had supper. It's like you're replaying that experience, replaying an episode of your life in your mind. Okay, we call that episodic memory. It's like a very conscious form of memory, a reliving of the past. Cool. Let's contrast that with semantic memory. So semantic memory is your memory about, it's just your knowledge, it's things that you know about the world, things you have learned through the course of your life. And so things like, about apples. This is some stuff you know about apples. They're edible, they're fruit, they have a stem, they have seeds, they grow on a tree, they're red, not always red, sometimes green, even yellow, tend to be roundish, sweet, etc. So as we go through life, we have experiences. And sometimes we relive those experiences. But sometimes we just learn things from those experiences and we end up knowing things to be true. So here's the way I like to sometimes kind of help people understand how these are related and how something becomes semantic versus episodic. There was a time when for the first time in your life, you learned that 3 times 4 equals 12. Okay, in some school, they had like 4, 4, and 4, like maybe 4 apples plus 4 apples plus 4 apples. So here's 3 things of 4. So we could count them all up. And if we count them all up, there'll be 12 because 3 times 4 equals 12. Right after you learned that the first time, if you came home from school and your mom said, "What did you learn in school today?" you might say, "I learned 3 times 4 equals 12. And at that point, this would be a very episodic memory. Again, you remember all the details, you just learned it. Even the next day, you learned it, you remember the teacher who taught it to you, etc. But here's the interesting thing. You don't just run into 3 times 4 equals 12 once in your lifetime. You run into it over and over and over. So you have one experience where you learn that, but then you have another experience, then you have another experience, then you have another experience. And what happens after a while is the details of the experience kind of disappear. And what you're left with is the knowledge that you've learned along the way. 3 times 4 equals 12. So when I ask you now, what is 3 times 4? You just get 12, but you don't have that reliving of the past experience. You don't have an episodic memory. You just know the answer. The answer just comes to mind. Okay, that sort of knowledge we call semantic memory. And that's what you're kind of learning as you go through university, right? You're starting to learn all the facts and information about psychology. And so eventually these will be things you just know. Okay. Now, again, both of these are what we call declarative memory. And what we mean by that is you know that you're querying your memory. You're intentionally going to your memory to get an answer to something. Maybe it's an episode that you're going to recount. Maybe it's just some knowledge that you know. But in either case, you're using your memory in a very explicit way. You're querying your memory to get some information. Okay. Right. And again, this is just what I suggested to you. When you encounter information across a bunch of different episodes, then that episodic memory turns into semantic memory over time, right? The knowledge just becomes stuff you know. Okay, so that's the story on the declarative side. A conscious episodic memory and a much more, you just know it, semantic memory. Let's contrast this with the non-declarative. So I like to do that with this slide to get you thinking about it. Let's say you came to me and said, "Professor Jordans, I would like to learn guitar." One of my first questions to you would be, do you want to learn about guitar and guitars, or do you want to learn to play guitar? Because those are two very different things. If you want information, now we're back in the declarative stuff. If we found a really good teacher who could explain guitars really well, provide a nice, engaging, structured lecture, you could go into that lecture and in like the space of an hour, You could learn a whole lot about guitars that you did not know previously, right? You can get a lot of information in that passive way. But what if you want to learn to play guitar? It's not going to happen passively. You're not just going to sit there and suddenly learn how to play guitar. You're going to have to play. You're probably not going to be very good at first. But if you engage in repeated, structured practice, preferably in an environment that supports your practice and that gives you regular feedback, then you'll slowly get better and better and better. So skills develop through use. All right. And that's why if you want to learn something like guitar, you have to spend a lot of time practicing. That's how skills become part of what we're able to do. Now, you might say, well, skills, I thought we were talking about memory. Yeah. Anytime the past affects your current behavior, when you see your favorite musician on stage and they're just playing, that's what they think they're doing. They're just performing. But their performance today, how good it is a function of how much time they spent practicing. Those past experiences are yielding their current performance. So in a psychologist's point of view, that's memory too. You're seeing their memory for the practice come out in their playing. But it's a very different kind of memory. They don't think they're trying to retrieve things from memory. They feel like they're just playing. And that's why we call it non-declarative. It's an effect of the past that just sort of carries with us and changes the way we behave now. The more practice, the better we will be at performing. Okay? So knowledge you can get pretty quickly. Skills take a lot of time, a lot of practice, and a lot of effort. Okay, I want to bring this home to you. This is sort of a place where my research kind of lives to some extent. I told you I used to be a memory researcher, and I did a lot of basic research on memory. I still kind of am, but I've gone much more applied and much more towards skills. So you guys know this. You just don't know what you've known, what you've run into to some extent. I have heard as a professor many, many times, employers saying, when your graduates, when U of T graduates graduate and they come work for us, they know their information well. They have learned the information well, but there's skills that we value. And here's a whole set of skills that you see sort of laid out around here. These are all things we call transversal competencies. These are things that if you're good at, they help you in a wide range of situations. And you can see them fully laid out there, but let me just boil them down to these 6 to make life easy on you. These 6 skills: your ability to think critically, your ability to think creatively, your ability to shut up and listen when other people are giving you information, your ability to express yourself well when it's your turn to give information, your ability to work with other people, and your ability to know your own strengths and weaknesses. That last one's called Metacognitive Awareness. Those skills, if you're good at them, they will help you in all sorts of contexts. In work contexts, certainly. They will help you be a very good employee. They'll also help you choose a good life partner. Critical thinking will help you pick the right life partner. Creative thinking will help you keep that person interested in you. Communication, wow, that's what will determine whether you and your partner stay together or not. How well you can listen to them now and then and express yourself well. And can you collaborate them and work together to build a family or a life, whatever it is. These are skills of success in general. Many people said universities don't teach these very well. I'm trying. So I take this very seriously. And I think part of our job as an educator is to give you the information, that declarative knowledge that you've been learning about. Try to get that into your long-term memory. But I think we also have to try to develop these skills in you. But these skills only develop through use. You have to exercise the skills, preferably in a structured environment with a lot of feedback. That's what Peer Scholar is all about. Just, so you've heard a little bit about that already. But the idea, you're assessing a peer. You see a peer's work, and you have to answer all these questions. And the questions we've created to try to get you to think critically and to think creatively and to be to listen to the other person, but then also to express your own perspective. And the idea is you have to do all that for peer one's work, and then for peer two's, and then for peer three, and then for peer four. With every peer that you assess, you are exercising those skills again. And that's the whole idea of Peer Scholar, is to give you an environment where you're exercising your critical thought, your creative thought. I mean, the Work Integrated Learning Project is all about creative thought. Not all about, but a big chunk of it is creative thought. And again, my idea in asking you to do this is to give you exercise with all these skills. This is, that non-declarative memory, that habit and skill. We sometimes call this procedural memory, by the way. When you exercise it over and over, the skill gets better and better and better. And with enough practice, unnatural skills can become second nature. You can have people like Jimi Hendrix play guitar like he was born playing guitar, but that's just a result of a lot of practice. You can become a critical thinker or a creative thinker or really good at expressing yourself if you practice. And that's the idea of the things like the Peer Scholar activities, is to make sure that part of your educational experience includes a lot of practice with those skills. And the hope is, again, this is non-declarative. The hope is you will graduate from university having done a bunch of these Peer Scholar activities in different courses and different situations, and you will graduate and these skills will just be something you have at a pretty good level. So when you're in some situation, you have to think critically, you just do it naturally. The practice has made you good, has allowed you to perform well, just like that artist, that musical artist. Okay, cool. So let me back up a bit because I kind of went down the skills rabbit hole there a little bit. But the idea of this lecture was to talk to you a little bit about long-term memory. And we're going to continue on the long-term memory theme with some of the other lectures, but the notion of that it also has different kinds. First of all, it has that declarative, non-declarative. So the declarative is when you're really trying to query memory to get some information. The non-declarative is just when the past affects you now. And within the declarative, we said there's also that distinction between an episodic memory when you're reliving the past versus a semantic memory when you just know something. You're just querying your memory for knowledge, and you're just able to get that knowledge. And so these are all aspects of long-term memory. And again, we're going to talk about long-term memory more, but hopefully you're starting now to see all of these pieces, and you're starting to see why the issue of human memory is a complex one. It's a lot of moving parts. But hey, we're very complex individuals, so that's not surprising. We will continue the story. The next couple lectures, I think, will be a little more fun. Sure, we'll say that. Will be a little more fun, and we'll take a lot of the work that you put into what you've been learning so far and then show you how it plays out in some interesting contexts. Okay, see you on the next lecture.